Andre, we can start.
Okay, we're all set. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, good morning to wherever you are in the world. And I'm happy to welcome you to this session on managing and responding to natural disasters in a changing climate. My name is Andre Gikus. I'm the Chief of Urban Basic Services at UN Habitat, and on behalf of GWOPA, we're the host of this Congress. I'm very happy to send greetings to you from the UN campus here in Bonn, from where the conference is being staged and managed. And of course, we've already heard a lot about climate and how climate is affecting our lives and how climate is really changing very rapidly. And what we see in a lot of the media is more and more intense, either flooding of extreme events or droughts, and also other weather-related extreme events. And in this session, I think it's very timely that we're looking forward to hearing about experiences of operators in responding to these scenarios, to these extreme events. Just to mention before we delve into the details, two technical aspects. There is a chat. So on the right-hand side, there's a blue icon where you can sign up to join the chat. So please do sign up and join the chat. And of course, this session also has simultaneous interpretation. And you can see English, French, and Spanish on the right-hand side in terms of simultaneous interpretation. I'd also very much like to appreciate and thank the two co-conveners of this session, which is the Caribbean Water and Wastewater Association and also the National Water Resources Association of the US. And we'd also like to recognize the partners for this session, which is the Bonn Water Network, who will actually be speaking and presenting a joint paper on strengthening climate resilience in Bonn, and also drawing lessons from the recent flooding which Germany has seen and which was a lot in the media internationally. I'd also like to mention that immediately following this session, one of our partners, the Operators Without Borders, is actually organizing an event on their activities to assist utilities to recover and rebuild after disasters. So please do join this event, the Operators Without Borders, to really learn more about what's happening in this area and also opportunities for capacity building and also training programs. So without any further time spent on this, I'd like to hand over to our moderator of the session, Ignatius Jean, who's the Executive Director of the Caribbean Water and Wastewater Association. Ignatius, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Andre, and good morning, or good day, everyone, I should say, because we are streaming against across time zones. I am Ignatius Jean. I'm the Executive Director of the Caribbean Water and Sewage Association, CAWASA. We are an association of water utilities in the Caribbean. I also represent the CARIWOP, that is the Caribbean Water Operators Partnerships, which is a subset of the WOPLAC of the Latin America and the Caribbean. And we, together with the CWWA, Caribbean Water and Wastewater Association, we partner to form the CARIWOP. And I also serve as a member of the International Steering Committee of the UN Habitat's Global Water Partnerships Alliance. The permanent secretariat of CARIWOP is hosted by the two water associations, on the CDEMA, that is the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Authority, under the WASH group, as well as we collaborate with the UNICEF WASHLAC for Latin America and the Caribbean. So I'd like to first congratulate the UN Habitat and the GWOPA and all the partners, particularly our co-conveners, the National Resources Association of the USA, for putting on this event, this special event here on managing and responding to natural disasters in a changing climate. Water and sanitation are key components of any adaptation strategy aimed at preserving human health in a changing world. Extreme weather events such as floods, droughts are occurring with increasing frequency and intensity globally. They affect the capacity and operations of existing water and sanitation infrastructures and services, and thereby threaten the protection of such services offered to human health and the environment. This Congress intends to capture the most relevant operators' responses to disaster and climate caused hazards. Our panel will share how we are responding to weather and climate challenges, how we can contribute and benefit from lessons learned and best practices. We will also focus on present and future challenges and hope that we will inspire the wider water and sanitation professional community to rethink current approaches and reassess existing remedies. Overall, this session aims to help operators better understand how to move from the current risk to resilience in the future and eventually become less vulnerable to anticipated natural and climate-related disasters. We are fortunate today to have a dynamic panel of people with diverse backgrounds who have worked extensively on disaster preparedness and recovery issues within conditions which suggest climatic turbulence. I expect a lively discussion, and I would like now to just mention that our panelists comprise Mr. John Batar, the General Manager of Cagayan de Oro City Water District of Mindanao, Philippines, Mrs. Heather Collins, Manager of the Water Treatment for the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. That's on the west coast of the USA. And on the east coast, we have my good friend, Mr. Kevin Carter, who is the Assistant to the Director at the Broward County Water and Wastewater Services in Florida. And we have a distinguished panelist who has been around, I guess, the inception of GWOPA, and who is Mr. Neil McLeod, former head of the Water and Sanitation eThekwini, South Africa, and distinguished other panelists from the academic area, academic community in Bonn, Germany, Mr. Saravanan V. Subramaniam, who is a senior researcher at the German Development Institute in Bonn, and who is assisted by his colleagues Katharina Horace and Natalie Sanger. Welcome, panelists, and I will now invite our first panelist to present, Mr. John Batar, who will give us his experiences with as far as floods and typhoons are concerned in disaster management with his utilities in the Philippines. Over to you, Mr. Batar.
Thank you, Ignatius.
Yes, we're having a
Yes, we're
little
having a little
technical
technical
difficulty.
difficulty.
We are
We
getting
are getting the screen.
okay.
Yeah.
Would you be able to share the screen, Ignatius? Here. Uh, Allow me to tell our story, the Cagayan de Oro City Water District, in dealing with climate disaster. We are located in the southern island of Mindanao in the Philippines, at the foot of the Cagayan de Oro Cagayan de Oro River Basin. So we really are in a precarious location, a disaster waiting to happen, so to speak. My organization is in Mindanao again, serving about 750,000 people. And we were the first water district established in the country in 1973. We have about 108,000 connections. And we have a staff of about 700 people and produce about 200,000 cubic meters per day. Water districts in the Philippines are government-owned and controlled corporations. And our main regulator is the local water utilities administration. Also the financing arm for water districts and the provider of technical assistance for water districts as well. So they're regulator, financier, and technical experts all rolled into one. This is a historical typhoon tracks that we've extracted from Google. And you can see that the Philippines bear the brunt of typhoons in the Pacific, together with some other countries like Japan and Taiwan, for example. Mindanao, however, and Cagayan de Oro City are relatively free from typhoons. Before 2010, Mindanao was generally spared. Specifically, our city was generally spared from typhoons mostly. However, on December 16, 2011, the Cagayan de Oro City Water District was getting ready for Christmas. We were having our Christmas party the evening of December 16. We did not bother to listen to typhoon signals because we did not have any typhoon in Cagayan de Oro, as far as I can remember. Getting ready for Christmas, but not ready for this. Floods reaching the second story of most buildings in many parts of the city. Tropical storm Washi hit Cagayan de Oro on the evening of December 16, 2011. And as far as I can remember, it was the first typhoon that hit my city. On the lower diagram there, you can see the path of the typhoon. And Cagayan de Oro is the northern part of the southern island of Mindanao. It damaged our major facilities in our water district, production wells, booster pumping station, laboratory, and such other equipment in those buildings. These are pictures of the damage in our main booster station in Makasandi. Other pictures of damage in the building, our laboratory, and the lower left-hand picture, I hope you can distinguish the watermark there. Floods reached almost the ceiling of the building. Fortunately, our pump operators were able to escape the wrath of this flood. A few more pictures of the damage in our production facilities. That's a foot thick of mud at least in the right picture there. And our generator was toppled over with the strong typhoon that hit us. Other damage to generators, this may not be very clear already, but then those generators were rendered useless after they were submerged in floods. And our booster pumps at the center we're using mostly vertical turbine pumps. The motors were completely submerged in water and rendered unoperational after the flood. And this was the only plan we had for recovery. We had no power then, no water, no phones, and so we went back to the old reliable whiteboard. A plan made in the heat of the moment, a plan made in haste, generally. And incidentally, I took this picture, not really thinking about it, just for posterity so that we can always remember what happened to us on that day. And we tried to gather the expertise of the different units of our organization. We knew the things that we should do, but certainly not in a crisis situation as what happened to us in 2016. One difficulty that we were anticipating was that the typhoon hit us on a Friday evening. We started mobilizing Saturday and Sunday, but we did not know whether we would have the warm bodies to work on the actual rehabilitation works that needed to be done over the first few days, the first 10 days, if I remember correctly. And so we looked at the problem and realized that we needed almost 40 people to work directly on the rehabilitation efforts. And this is just what we could do to prepare for it. Fortunately, when Monday came, we had the manpower we needed. Typhoon Sendong, which happened in 2011, supposedly was a 50-year flood. But then unfortunately, perhaps, we hit the tail end of the first 50 years. And then in 2012, we entered this second part, or the first year of this second 50-year period. Because in 2012, Typhoon Pablo hit us much stronger than Sendong, but fortunately did not bring a lot of rain with it. 2013, Typhoon Yolanda hit the Philippines and was threatening Mindanao. It did not hit us, but hit somewhere else. And so we started writing our emergency response plan, such that in 2014, we had a one-page plan that identified 3 levels of preparations, depending on the signal that we hit. And I understand that Maurice Tubon and Chris Petit are in the audience right now. When they saw this, they smiled with very clear smiles. We got help from the USAID BICICure project again through Maurice and Chris. And we formulated, with the assistance of this project, our emergency response plan. And so from a one-page document, it became a book. This is constantly reviewed and updated with the assistance of Vitens Evides International. And we identified 5 levels of scenarios here, as well as a level 0 or a pre-emergency action plan. This came in very handy because in December 2017, Tropical Storm Vinta hit us almost with the same intensity as Typhoon Sendong 6 years after. But fortunately for this, we have adaptation options that we have implemented. We built better, we have the emergency response plan, and we have replaced most turbine pumps with submersible pumps. And this is the picture during Sendong and Vinta side by side. They hit us almost with the same intensity and damaged most of our, hit us with the same intensity, affected almost the same proportion of the population, but we were better prepared. We completed restoration within 8 days compared to 25 during Sendong, and the cost of rehabilitation was also much lower. At this time, we are in the midst of a partnership called Ridge to Coast Rain to Top project, together with Vitens Evides International and a few other partners, for flood protection infrastructure, the annual update and drill of the ERP, and above all, river basin restoration and reforestation. Through this project, we would like to have an enabling environment for reforestation and protection against risks of flooding, not only for our facilities, but for the city as well. These are pictures of our partners who are starting to plant Caliandra, the precursor to more sturdier trees that will be planted in the area. And so that's our experience. It's a story to tell for everyone to believe that a good plan is the best route to recovery. Incidentally, may I mention that my colleague, Adrian Reinscott, is with me now to help answer the questions later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Thank you very much,
Mr.
Batar,
for this very good
this very good
presentation.
presentation.
I'm going to assume that you can hear me. I could not hear Ignatius. So I think I'm on deck.
Yep, you are. Can hear you fine.
Okay. And you should be able to see my screen. I'm hoping you can see that.
Yes, we can.
The screen is on, correct?
It's gone now. It was on. There, it's come back.
I'm trying to get it into the mode where you can see it. There you go. Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for allowing me to take a few minutes here and give you a little bit of a perspective from the West Coast of California, of United States of America. I work for Metropolitan Water District, and I'm the water treatment manager for Metropolitan. And just to give you a perspective of, we are a regional wholesaler. What that means is that for Southern California, which is a large portion of the state, serving about 19 million environs, we have a system that spans over 5,200 square miles, essentially about 13,000 plus square kilometers. And we serve over 1.5 million acre feet, kind of 16, 17, 18 cubic meters, if you will, in a very large economy for the state of California and for the US. And the amount of water, just in perspective, that we serve to our 26 member agencies who are our customers, who then serve to other agencies and other folks, represents about, one out of actually 17 Americans. So in the state of California, we've got a population close to 33. In America, there's a lot more, so we're serving 1 out of every 17 Americans. So it's quite a bit expansive area. Our water supply is diversified from the standpoint of we own and operate the Colorado River Aqueduct, shown in your lower portion of your screen. This comes off a river system for the 7 western states of the U.S., and we intake water and pump it through a series of pumping plants. But then as it crests the mountains in the Southland, it flows by gravity into the rest of our service area. And that's a very important standpoint when it comes to reliability. We also have a northern supply. We are a state contractor to the state project water system that is managed by the Department of Water Resources and also managed by influences of Bureau of Reclamation for the western states. We have diversified supplies in partnerships and collaborations through groundwater storage up and down the Central Valley, kind of in the central portion of the state where there's a lot of agriculture and a lot of alluvial areas where you can store lots of water. We also have surface storage that's from the north, and we also have storage that's in the south. Those are important when it comes to looking at tapping reliability and tapping different sources when you get into disasters of such that arise. We know that disasters never sleep. They are not, they're not particular in the time that they arise. Like our former speaker said, they always seem to show up on a Friday afternoon or before a holiday weekend and so forth. So as Metropolitan, as the wholesaler, the southern part of the state's relying upon us, and our members are relying upon us. So we have to be different in our outlook of reliability and strategy, which, ensures that they're going to have service. So it's a coupling of looking at water supply, the system capacity we have, our infrastructure reliability, the system flexibility that we can offer, and the emergency response. And all of these together provide that reliability support. And, to ensure that we're routinely and looking at, ways to improve our preventative maintenance, inspection and monitoring programs, and conducting special assessments and investigations to ensure the integrity of our system operation. There's very integrated portion of this when it comes to emergency response as we deal with fires, floods, earthquakes, drought, heat, extreme heat. We have a unified emergency response program. We have an enterprise level team that it represents all aspects and areas of our workforce, from finance, logistics, procurements, operations, media, outreach. And so those teams organized, we make sure that we're having adequate supplies, both in the basin, at our facilities. Because we are large, we are decentralized. We have one emergency operations center that is kind of a local one where if there's a big disaster, we staff that. But then there's also 12 decentralized incident command posts at our different facilities that also have their local hubs. We are successful in preparing for emergencies by our dedication to exercises that we do. We do tabletop and full-scale exercises, and we integrate our partners, those from the first responding entities to our customers, our member agencies, and allow them to participate so that when it comes to points of implementing and mitigating disaster, we already have relationships with them. We've been working with fire departments, health departments, local military outlets, fire, police, etc. They know our facilities. They've been there. They're familiar with them, and they're not a surprise when something does come up. They know who we are and our importance to the region to provide safe water. When we talk about wildfires, a lot of discussion lately with respect to the drier climate, the more extreme dries and wetter wets. And when you have wildfires, then you have to be thinking about the impact to the source water quality that you're treating. We know that, during active fires, utilization of fire retardants by the Forest Service or others that are combating these fires. And after, when the rains come or there's potential runoff, the sediments that are that run off and impregnated in the rivers and source water supplies with respect to nutrients and metals and organics. We monitor the watersheds all throughout that impact our source supplies so that we have a heads up to know what we need and how we need to adapt. And then we're working on protection programs for our source watersheds with a lot of our partners, state and county and firefighting entities. Those are some of those that are mentioned there. This isn't just a view for you. This is a fire from about a decade ago. This is one of our treatment plants. This is at a treatment plant in Orange County, California. You can see the plant in the foreground with the reflection of the water, but there is fire completely around the facility. We've had a couple of these to this extent. We have had sheltering in place by our operators due to their valor and their duty. We have air handling systems that we've improved in order for them to stay there. And when you look at concrete, a lot of these structures are really concrete. They're not going to burn necessarily. They're just going to kind of go over them. This plant went kind of unscathed, basically, just some landscaping around this plant and facility and some exterior piping in different places that were exposed to the heat. But, to ensure then, and I know I'm kind of getting over time, we'll have points where we can talk about, before and after wildfire events, what we do to ensure treatment effectiveness. We have a lot of tools. We have a lot of flexibility in our treatment process. We have a variability and flexibility in our system supply. We have lots of monitoring and preparation. So, and with respect to preparation for emergency power and reliability. Also, we'll be talking a little bit about seismic. We're in a very actively seismic zone. We have programs to ensure that standards and pipeline materials are mitigated against for the best resistance to seismic vulnerability. We've reinforced all of our structures and are looking at an overall approach to reduce seismic. We also, from a standpoint of our readiness, we have a small construction company, if you will, within Metropolitan. We have manufacturing shops, we have construction crews, we have heavy equipment, and we maintain readiness to be able to roll our own pipe, to replace, breaks within a few days when they occur in-house and not have to go with outside contract. But we do maintain those readiness contracts as well. The drought is the one thing that's really plaguing us at the moment. Majority of the state, or all of the state now, as of yesterday, is in the D4, the really deep red extreme drought. You can see some of the photos that from our depleting supplies and reservoirs. So our governor, called for that mandate, and there's lots of cutbacks, and we're now looking to the point of considering, in addition to water supply alerts, also looking at considering allocation plans. The board of Metropolitan will take that up next month. And so collectively, there's overall strategy for drought planning that we need to be looking at to ensure our flexibility. and it looks at changing water supply dynamic changes, but also we're really core on that system flexibility that will help us ride us through. We'll talk about some of the actions, and we can talk about that more in the Q&A. So with that, I'll turn it back to Ignatius.
Thank you very much, Heather. We will move straight along and head to South Africa this time, where we will have Mr. Neil Macleod, and many of us will remember the challenges that we faced in when it was getting down to near day zero in Cape Town. So over to you, Mr. Macleod, the former head of the Water and Sanitation eThekwini, South Africa, who still is pretty active even though he is retired. The floor is yours.
Thanks. Can I just check that you can hear me?
Yes, sir. We can hear you loud and clear.
Right. Thank you. So I had wanted to put up a picture, I'm not going to use slides, of a cyclone that hit the Durban area in the late 1980s. Our history goes back to 1850, and we never knew about cyclones until 1987. And then we had two within 5 years. The first cyclone, De Moyne, came after a severe drought, what was said to be a 1 in 500 year drought event. And the Durban metropolitan area now comprises 4 million people, so it's not small. And the dams got down to 5%. And I was about to call, it was just before the Christmas break in 1997, all the major water industries, the oil refineries, the Coca-Cola factories, the textile mills, and tell them they had to shut down and send their staff home because we needed to conserve the water for individuals. And then De Moyne hit in the Christmas shutdown. And we had 600 millimeters of rain, 2 feet of rain in 24 hours. And the crisis was averted. But of course, we had to go through almost a year of managing the demand to make that ever decreasing amount of water in our dams last. And so the demand had to be cut to about 40% of what it normally was. And there were a lot of lessons we learned there. For example, we only had one set of tariffs, and we realized that we needed different tariffs for different states of water availability. And we didn't have those, and it was a mad scramble to put that in place. We also realized we hadn't prepared industry for pressure management. So when you cut the pressure to 5 meters head at the critical point, some industries started complaining that their buildings were no longer protected against fire, and they weren't ready for it. So those were the lessons that we learned on the run. And then a second cyclone came 5 years later and washed away all the major river crossings. And our storage reservoirs in the metros typically hold 48 hours of water. And now we had no water coming into the metro, none at all. And we had to make that last 2 weeks, and just listening to the previous speakers, while we worked with the army and others to fly in piping and rebuild bridges and all the rest of it. And again, we learned lessons from that in terms of the importance of communication to manage demand. And then having survived those, and I retired in 2014 and started consulting, Cape Town then hit its crisis. And I was asked by the national disaster people to go and work with the Cape Townians and share our experiences from Durban, which we did. And following that, can you believe it? Cape Town's also about 4 million people. One of the smaller metros, the 6th largest in the country, Port Elizabeth, is now in the middle of a drought and is due to lose most of their local storage by March, April next year. So that's 1.2 million people in the metropolitan area, again in serious trouble. And so Cape Town has been to share through peer learning their experiences, and I'm now working with them as well. And as GWOPA, for me, that's the message, the importance of being able to take experiences from one area and share them with another area. So what are the key takeaways, I believe, that we've learned from these crises? The first one is that a third party, somebody not close to the action, is often believed by the board or the political leadership more in some cases than their own people. And that third party person can be used to take difficult messages which the management themselves have tried to take, but just because they're external for some reason, and we know why, the message is suddenly believed. And some of those messages are quite difficult. For example, we learned in Durban that the only way you can really get people to cut demand is to set a target, say 20 cubic meters a month, and then charge a very, very high tariff for any demand or any consumption above that. When I say very high, I'm talking about $65 a cubic meter. That's the kind of number currently that we were suggested to Cape Town, and they did it, and to Port Elizabeth, and they've done it too now. And it has a salutary effect. Cape Town had 100,000 domestic customers using more than the 20 cubic meters a month limit. 2 months after we increased the top tariff to $65, only 1,000 and a bit were using more than the quota. So we know that tariffs are a powerful tool. And equally, pressure management. To tell factories they're only going to get 5 meters head at their factory door does send some fear through the political leadership about the sustainability of such a move. But they have been carried through and implemented, and that's one of the main reasons how Cape Town got through its crisis. The other thing is that we've also learned that you can't build your way out of a drought. In fact, you can't build your way out of a flood either, quite honestly. And so demand management and communication are the tools that we have learned, are the two key things. And the lessons that we've learned from Durban and Cape Town have now been used to good effect in helping Port Elizabeth to get through their crisis. So the normal things: reducing pressure, changing the tariffs, and restricting the flow. We actually designed in Durban a valve called a water management device, which delivers a fixed amount of water in a 24-hour period and then shuts off. A very useful tool to manage excessive demands and keep people within their quotas. And they've been used in Cape Town, and now they're going to be used in Port Elizabeth. It's also important to have an all-of-city approach. You may be the water utility, but if you don't take the rest of the city government along, we've learned that you won't have the kind of success that you need, because the city itself has a role to play as a customer of the water utility. And then communication. If you don't communicate, what today we call fake news prevails. And we saw that in Cape Town. If you're not regularly explaining to people why they need to cut demand, why the tariffs have to go up, why you're taking the actions that you do, and what the impact it will have on people, then the customers start making up their own stories about, oh, this horrible utility is cutting off our water for no good reason, or these tariffs are ridiculous, or whatever. We found that once we communicated that we had a plan and that the messaging was coherent and common across all the channels, people suddenly started to think that actually the utility knew what it was doing rather than being extremely critical. That was a major turning point in Cape Town, and we're starting to see that happening in Port Elizabeth. And then peer learning, the value of peer learning, being able to take lessons that have been learned by others and jump through a whole lot of steps and implement them, and being able to say, well, Durban did it and Cape Town did it, so Port Elizabeth, we can safely do the same thing and know what the impact's going to be. We know that it'll take 5 years for demand to return to normal. We know it takes 6 months for habits to form in people and for those habits to remain for 5 years. Those kinds of things are very useful when you're talking about planning for the future and for resilience. And as Winston Churchill said, never let a good crisis go to waste. And so it's an opportunity to build resilience. Most of our metros, in fact, all of them, rely on surface water. Well, they did. And now we're starting to see in Durban, we started doing reuse. Cape Town's doing the same thing. Where boreholes and groundwater are possible, those well fields are now being developed at scale with recharge. And so we're starting to see the metros now resorting to a wide range of interactions to increase the availability of supply. And the biggest new thing with climate change, of course, is dealing with what we call invasive aliens, removing plants that suck a whole lot of water out of the ground that aren't indigenous. So big clearing programs to remove the invasive aliens, which has a dual effect. It increases the runoff and it improves the water quality. So those are the lessons that we have learned. And I think I will stop there. It's a pity you didn't see the picture of one of the two cyclones ever to hit Durban. But thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, and you gave us all the good lessons that you picked up, and I'm sure we will elaborate on those as we go further with the program. I will now invite Mr. Saravanan Subranian, who is the senior researcher at the German Development Institute, and his colleagues to present. That is Ms. Katharina Horace and Natalie Sanger.
Thank you so much, Ignis. I'll just share my screen. Yeah, can you see my screen, please? Hello?
Yes, but not in the presentation mode yet.
Yes.
Okay, now?
Yes,
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ignish, for giving the Born Water Network community an opportunity to share some of our research findings in this forum. The Born Water Network community is a consortium of 10 institutions working on water management themes that ranges from hydrological studies, agriculture water management, water supply, to sanitation to water governance. And today, as we introduce ourselves, myself being with the German Development Institute, Ms. Katharina from the Geography Department, University of Bonn, and Ms. Nathalie from the UNU EHS Bonn, take this opportunity to present our study on the climate resilience efforts in Bonn, which played a major role in avoiding the recent flooding in the city. We will primarily highlight some of the strategies adopted by the authorities to avoid the flood in the city. The presentation is structured in 3 parts. I will present an overview of the Bonn City's flood management strategy, while Ms. Hureth will dwell in depth into the Malem Creek management, and Ms. Sangers will highlight the drivers and barriers to flood management that is critical to improving climate resilience in Bonn. Bonn has been witnessing floods in the past. But what is significant in the recent years is that, especially from the beginning of this century, is that it has been witnessing intensive rains during summer months. And this has led to floods in many parts of the city, and especially starting from 2010. And the city has been also forecasting the mean change in annual precipitation to increase from 1.3 to 4% by mid of the century and 6.6% by end of the century. And Bonn City is aware of this changes that is happening, and it is committed to being climate neutral by 2035. Its Integrated Climate Change and Adaptation Concept 2013 has several measures that it points out and wants to make Bonn as a global capital for climate protection. Bonn City has, following the various floods in the past, it has started mapping the flood risk area and as a flood risk areas, which is the different forms of flood risk, which is red or yellow and in blue form. But in addition to that, flood risk areas along the River Rhine, it is also mapped the flood risk along the catchment or the creek areas, or what we call as the bachs. There is Hartbach. There are 3 major creeks in Bonn City: Hartbach, Godersberg, and Malembach. And it is Malembach where our colleague will highlight a little bit in detail. Bonn City has a comprehensive resilience approach plan. At one level, it focuses on the hydrological side. When we say hydrology, it focuses on the higher catchment area, at the creek level, and at the sewer level in the city. The catchment management measures is a combination, or the policies or the measures are drawn from the European Union Water Framework Directive and the federal strategic document, and from the city level strategic document that has been prepared. And mainly they focus on renaturization measures along the River Rhine and along the water courses, the water courses along the creeks areas. the creek, which will be presented by my colleague. But the important thing is about the sewer management. The city's sewer is managed by a combination or a network of 70 municipal wastewater company called ComNet Abwasa. It's part of a network in the northern comes under. And this network regularly monitors and maintains the sewer to ensure that the sewer network can drain water and, where possible, retain the flood water for future use. It closely liaises with the fire department during the flood times, and it meets on a regular basis, especially during the occurrence of flood period. It is this combination of technical hydrological programs, management program that is there, which it is combines with the management focus, where it combines the social, technical, and solidarity approach, wherein it tries to bring in the involvement of civil societies in the flood management measures. There will be a great number of opportunities for us to discuss in the Q&A how these are being done. But what is interesting is it uses a combination of the catchment management or the hydrological management along with the management focus to offer early warning monitoring system for flood and its response and adaptation strategies. Bond City, in addition to that, though it draws lessons from its own past, it actively collaborates with other cities for cross-learning, especially one that we want to highlight is the municipal climate partnership between Bonn and Cape Coast in Ghana, where one example is to start with in the restoration of Fuzu Lagoon in Cape Coast, Ghanaian city. In addition to these, Bonn City is also working closely with Chengdu, Bukhara in Uzbekistan, and Minsk in Belarus. Now I request my colleague Katerina to present the management efforts at the creek level.
Thank you very much, Saravanan. I hope you can hear me. Well,
Yes.
let's have a look at the flood risk measures at the Millem Creek in Bonn now. With its length of 4,800 meters, the creek flows from the neighboring municipality Wachtberg through Bonn-Millem into the River Rhine. The catchment of 18 square kilometers has a relatively high elevation and is sensitive to heavy rainfalls. So this map here shows the risk of extreme flood events in the estuary area of the Millem Creek. The creek is passing an area with vegetation, here marked in green, afterwards an industrial area marked in purple, and shortly before the mouth into the River Rhine, a residential area, where red marks the highest risk in case of extreme flood events, like, for example, in the year 2010, but also earlier in history. In 2010, the water masses of the creeks exceeded the capacity of the creek channel and flooded streets and buildings in the estuary area, which you can see here on the pictures. On the next slide, we will see which measures followed the event in 2010. The mouth into Rhine was renewed in 2010. Furthermore, the city of Bonn constructed a bypass, which has been finished in 2019. During the heavy rainfalls event this July, the bypass allowed large quantities of water to be diverted directly into the River Rhine, thus avoiding major damages. Additionally, a warning system for high water levels has been installed along several creeks in Bonn city, for example, Millem Creek, also Bad Godesberg Creek you saw before, including sirens to warn the population, as well as raising awareness of the population was one of the important measurements. Well, now I'm glad to hand over to my colleague, Nathalie Sänger. Thank you.
Thank you, Katharina. I hope you can all hear me now.
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So I will now conclude with some of my results that are from my master thesis, which I recently submitted, where I actually investigated what are some of the drivers and barriers to climate resilience, including flood management in Bonn. And the findings that you see here, I categorized them in 3 different groups, and I just want to highlight a few things here. So we have, for example, environmental, economic, and social factors, such as the limited availability of space, that is very often a driver to flood management. We also have civil society expectations, such as, for example, we have movements like the Fridays for Future movement, at the same time as we have those not in my backyard individuals that do not want to have necessarily flood measures right in front of their doorstep. But we also have political and institutional measures or factors such as the distribution of resources. So how much money and personnel is the City Council in Bonn actually willing to invest in climate resilience? And there's also legal systems that still need to be aligned to sponge city ideals, such as, for example, green infrastructure measures, green roofs, for example. And lastly, we have organizational factors within the city administration of Bonn, such as hierarchies and power distribution, cooperation and communication among offices, roles and responsibilities not only of offices but also of individuals, including their conflicts of interest that may either function as drivers but can also function as barriers depending a little bit on their context. And lastly, I think it is important, particularly in the context of the recent flood events in Western Germany, to make use of this opportunity and address the barriers and also strengthen the drivers so that Bonn can increase its climate resilience. And with that, I would like to close this presentation. Thank you very much for your attention, and feel free to ask us any questions in the Q&A.
Thank you very much from the team from Bonn. And as we would say, that would have been done with German efficiency. So we'd like to move straight ahead to the east coast of the United States, where it's one of the most vulnerable regions to hurricanes and flooding events. Over to you, Kevin.
All right, good day, everyone. Hopefully you can see my screen. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and I really want to thank my good friend Ignatius for reaching out to me to be on this prestigious panel, and also to Ian Lyle with the National Water Resources Association here in the United States. You know, one of the great things of being on a panel like this at the end is you get to see all the commonalities that we share across the globe, dealing with disasters, being resilient. But you also have a lot of tough acts to follow. So I'm going to try to get us to Q&A here and sort of tell the Florida story. Let me get this in play mode. Oop. How's that look?
Yeah, great.
Excellent. All right, so for those of you who are not aware, Broward County is just north of Miami, Miami-Dade County. So we're about 20, 25 miles north of that area here in the southeast metropolitan area of Florida. And today I'm going to talk about some of the ways that we're dealing with climate change and being resilient. And I'm going to kind of just give some snippets so that we can get to our panel. And being in South Florida, we've sort of been at the epicenter in our country as far as climate change and sea level rise. You know, right now I'm sitting at about maybe 5 meters above sea level, and other parts of South Florida, you're looking at a half meter. So certainly we've been thinking about the future, looking at the future, and planning for it. And our governance and our county local officials, which is one governance level below the states here in the United States, made it a priority, a policy priority over 10 years ago. And out of that, the utilities started a process of where we're calling it operationalizing resilience. And in particular, I want to thank my friend and colleague in Miami-Dade County, Harneep Anand, who's got the utilities in South Florida together to think about how do we move forward with resilience against climate change. So many of you know the shocks and stresses that we face, both from sudden events such as hurricanes. We just heard from earthquakes and, you know, from Heather in California, and then the stresses that affect our system on daily timescales, but really occur over even longer timescales, and how they interplay as we look to develop resilience. In South Florida here, you can see we obviously, again, are very low lying as far as our sea level and next to it, and as far as future sea level rise. but also how saltwater intrusion, as that comes in, is affecting our systems, population and development pressures, and a big one here in the United States right now, aging infrastructure. And so as we work with our daily systems, then the sudden events come, and well put by John and others that we don't know when they're coming. And for us, it always seems like a hurricane comes at 2 a.m. and at high tide. And so what I want to talk about with resiliency today is making us resilient to these stresses so that we are stronger when the sudden events come. And so I'm just going to go through a few strategies, best management practices that we're working on, and then not just in Florida. I think this is something that's going on across the United States. We have some different characteristics due to where we are geography. Good asset management and good investment equals capital improvement programs and resilient operations. So in other words, know your system, know where your system has weaknesses, have good investment to fix those weaknesses that leads to an operation that is resilient and makes your operators' jobs a lot easier before an event and recovering from that event. And one example we have in South Florida of climate change is increased saltwater intrusion into our groundwater, where we get almost all of our public water supplies. And in this case, what we're doing, metal pipes were traditionally put in the 1950s and 60s and 70s. Now we're going in and putting PVC pipes that are more resistant to saltwater intrusion, and importantly, in places that didn't have saltwater intrusion before. Hardening facilities is certainly important, and when it comes to wind, and John touched on this for the Philippines, many of our buildings in South Florida were built before we had perhaps you heard of our famous Hurricane Andrew in the early 90s. And so our old facility had metal doors and just essentially almost plastic windows. The thinking wasn't at the time about being resilient to hurricane winds. Now with technology, we have hurricane rated strength windows and doors that can make you resilient almost to a category 4. So hardening facilities is one way to operationalize resilience. Heightening our facilities and assets, going back again to that common theme of South Florida being low-lying, we do pump our groundwater. And in this case, when most of the pumps were put in, sea level rise and those types of things weren't thought of. And so we would put them as close to the ground as possible. Now what we're doing is raising them up, and you can see this concrete block here to help the wellhead be raised 2 feet. For in this case, this is a pretty inland wellhead, in order to avoid potential floodwater contamination. And this idea of raising above floodwaters is going to vary, of course, wherever you are in the globe. But it's something that typically in the United States that we're really starting to look at as far as operationalizing resilience. And then this is one of my favorite pictures when I get to talk about resilience. My colleagues down at Miami-Dade County, for those of you who've been to Miami, this is off on Key Biscayne. This wastewater plant was put in, I believe, in the 1920s or 30s. And they did some modeling to look at future storm surge with sea level rise impacts. So in other words, looking out 30, 40 years, what's the projected tides going to be like? What's with a category 3 or 4 storm? What's that storm surge going to be? And they found out that 80% of this wastewater treatment plant was below flood design elevation, which again, a picture you can pretty much tell that that's going to be the case. But here's some of the results of that work. This is an old chlorine building for treatment of the wastewater. This is the roof. This is the new chlorine building facility. This is the floor. So essentially the new design elevation is at the roof of the old design. So if you're in a coastal area or even in a floodplain, and you think about sea level rise for coastal areas, increased intensity of rainfall, these are the types of design features you may want to consider. And then the last thing I want to close with is no matter how much we're designing and getting our assets ready and being more resilient, we're going to have disasters. And in Florida, what we've done, and it's being done across other states in the United States, is we have what's called a WARN program, which is a water and wastewater agency response network. Now, it's a formalized system, and essentially we call it utilities helping utilities. And it originated for Florida when we had 8 hurricanes back in 2004 and 2005. And because it is a national system, in some events, we actually work with other states in order to respond to disasters. Like, I was very glad to hear Heather talk about coordinating with other sectors. And that's one of the key things that the Florida WARN does, is we work with emergency managers in our state to coordinate on their response. But we have that focus on utilities where we're able to respond quicker to utility needs. And the way it works, if I'm in Fort Lauderdale, Miami, Florida, a hurricane hits Jacksonville, we're able to send our resources, people and equipment, up soon after the landfall to get water and wastewater services back up and running. In 2018 was probably one of our proudest deployments. We had over 300 utility personnel from out the state respond to the Panhandle after Hurricane Michael. In fact, we had over 60 from South Florida that traveled over 885 kilometers to respond to that disaster. And you can see some of the scenes of what it was like on Mexico Beach. So having that emergency plan coupled with mutual aid and partnerships to respond to the disaster is certainly a way to continue your resilience, even as we go through climate change. So with that, this is my last slide. I'd like to say conversations lead to solutions, which is good because I'm the last speaker and we can get to our panel. But I do want to say, because I had an international forum, one of the things we're looking at in Florida, and I'm working with Ignatius, is how can Florida utilities assist with international disasters? And I'll give a plug as our at the beginning of this session for Operators Without Borders. Please stay on and listen to the next panel. They've been doing some great disaster response in the Caribbean. And with that, I will stop, and I think we can get to Q&A, Ignatius.
Right. Thank you very much, Kevin. We are going to go straight into the Q&A. I'd just like to say that as I'm dealing with the Caribbean, we deal with similar situations, and we do have our own networks with support from the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Authority, as well as agency, as well as through CAWASA and the Caribbean Water and Wastewater Association. We do have some response mechanisms, and to which we have also in the Caribbean developed what we call a regional strategic action plan for managing or building resilience in the water sector in the region. And we are now moving towards forming or establishing a sort of formal response mechanism by way of having a Caribbean Water Utilities Insurance company. And that is work well in progress, and hopefully we should see the launch of that next year so that we would be able to finance people moving around the region to give support for utilities to, in the first responders program, to give support, as well as to ensure the infrastructure. I just thought I should pull that plug there for our region. But getting back, it's a long way since we started to, I think, get back to the Philippines. And I know that John mentioned the work that they have done with respect to Reach the Coast River to Top project. I think I got it right. River basin restoration, flood protection. How difficult it is, John, to be able to get financing or to convince the policy makers to invest in such a program?
I will have to ask my colleague Adrian to help me answer that. But then at the outset, for example, one of the things that we're advocating under that project is the payment for ecological services. It did not, it did not gain traction in our society in Cagayan de Oro City because, well, many companies were using water resources, sort of protecting their interests as well. But then I'll have to hand over to Adrian, who has been
Sure.
working on this also.
Hi everyone, thanks for allowing me to join also. I think as Jian Zhong said, we have a wide network of partners which are working under the Cagayan de Oro River Basin Management Council. So there's a formalized organization which brings together many stakeholders ranging from academia, from companies, from local governments. And they have a number of technical working groups focusing on different topics, one of which is, of course, finance. And your question is a very relevant one. It's one of the most difficult ones. But a major win has been achieved about 2 years ago when a Payment for Ecosystem Services ordinance was formalized by the Cagayan de Oro government, allocating a fixed fund annually, in this case about 10 million pesos annually, for river basin restoration activities. And I think those are the kind of activities that we need to build on.
Right.
Right.
Thank you. Now I'm going to move across to California, because one of the things that came out was to deal with effective communication, and I think throughout all the presentations that was so. How is it? How do water and wastewater utilities, or in your case, so they able to communicate to your stakeholders the need to invest in the future reliability of the water sector, or how do you manage to effectively communicate during a crisis so that you can get all your stakeholders to take ownership?
Thanks for the question, Ignatius. We have a very active outreach and external affairs program who really has reached out to our media partners, and we work with a number of environmental reporters and news reporters that help track and reinforce, and we educate them on, what our pressing needs are, what disasters are currently are going on, and help reinforce the need to try to protect, prepare, and adapt to climate change. And we really are viewing those as allies to help us invest in solutions. And also, with respect to what Kevin mentioned, the active capital investment program, we're very transparent with our board actions and our readiness and our assessments and studies that we do with respect to system reliability, system needs, system weaknesses. We present that news and the status to the board, to our member agencies, and to the public through our media campaigns, through our press releases, through our social media fronts. And we talk about the need for the environs to help the investment. We need their assistance with respect to conservation, and letting them know that there are tools and programs and rebates available for them that they can help do their part to help with leveraging, whether it be the disaster of conserving during an earthquake, during a fire, or in the current crisis that we're dealing with drought. So those types of communication and collaborations are what we look up to and have that conversation and dialogue, and just trying to engage everybody, the partners, the media, the environs, our board, our customers. So it's all about planning and communication and dialogue with that.
Okay, thank you. We have, for example, water and wastewater utilities, the operation, supply, distribution systems are at risk owing to these challenges. And what are some of I think it was Neil who gave us some key lessons that they had learned in Cape Town and we're able to present that to other utilities or to support other utilities. But one of the key things that he said was that there's a tendency that people would not listen within the organization to themselves. But if some independent person or from another utility would come in to share that message, it would assist in getting the message across. I don't know if Neil cares to elaborate on how he was able to achieve success with that approach. You around, Neil?
Yeah, I'm here. So maybe it's a South African phenomenon, but I have seen it in other places where I've worked. Where if you've had an experience in your utility in a difficult circumstance and you have ideas, the utility you go to may have had the same ideas, but because they don't have a track record of having done it, they can't refer to a test case to say, well, we did this and this is what happened, and therefore we recommend that you try it. So that's what I found, certainly with Cape Town. I mean, trying to convince the mayor to, as I said, increase the tariff 35-fold and change processes within the metro to accelerate things and look at sometimes not doing things. Like, don't do desalination because it's just too jolly expensive. Do other things first. The need to build resilience, and rather than just relying on what's happened in the past. If you can refer to something that you've done and it's been successful and you can motivate, that seems to build confidence in the decision makers. They want to know who's done it before and what was the outcome and what were the risks. And sometimes, what did you do that didn't work? I've had to do that too sometimes, where the board wants to do one thing and the management team don't think it's a good idea. You can say, well, we did that and it was a disaster. And it tends to have a moderating effect. So that's how I've seen it work. But maybe the others have got a different experience.
Well, yeah, I don't think it is unique to South Africa. I think it is often said that you're never king in your own country sometimes. So that is a good lesson, I believe, we can exchange on the forum. I don't know if there are questions in the chat. I haven't seen any from the chat that I can view here, but I would like to ask, I think it was Heather who was saying some of the drivers and barriers that you experience or you put together. It was in your thesis, I believe, and some of the challenges you had with organizational factors such as conflict of interest and some of the social norms. Do you care to elaborate some of these as you have some more time?
Yes, I believe this was regarding my part. This was about my master thesis that I recently submitted, and I had a variety of factors. You just mentioned conflict of interest, and I identified conflicts of interest inside the city administration that is actually, at least in Bonn, responsible for planning and also implementing flood protection measures, and also outside the city administration. So, for example, I identified conflicts of interest between real estate and property investors and just other parts of the, such as parts of the society, for example, also between socio-environmental groups, such as Fridays for Future, for example, but also internal conflicts of interest between different departments. For example, the Department of Environment and Urban Green has very different interests than the civil engineering civil engineering department or the urban planning departments. However, they are all somewhat responsible for finding solutions and improving climate resilience and implementing flood response. And that's a result that I came across in my master thesis. And I think what is needed to overcome these barriers is better communication and cooperation with, for example, roundtables, with also raising awareness among the issues, and just a better exchange between the actors. Thank you.
Yeah, but Professor Saravanan, while you're at it, the political and legal infrastructure or institutional factors, how do they bear on you, particularly if you some of the the measures that you want to implement in terms of the early warning systems and the cost of doing that? Again, that's all you would have maybe representatives in the parliament or the mayors of the cities, the cost to them, and of course, some of what you want to implement may affect some of the communities and it may affect the whole political livelihoods. How have you been able to manage through these challenges?
In Germany, it's a very highly decentralized or structure where the city authorities have more power, though they draw on the policies from the federal government and the state government, but the local authorities have more power in taking certain decisions. But having said that, doesn't mean everything goes on smoothly. But there are some mechanisms in place in the city authorities where they meet often between various water utility companies. So wastewater company, drinking water board, or early warning system from the engineering department people. They have a meeting that takes place on a monthly or a quarterly basis. But at the same time, if there are any issues that needs to be addressed or intensively debated, and it is after this debate, it takes a while. Things are not that simple as we seem to show it. But yes, the differences are there. As Nathalie pointed out in her presentation, there is not in my backyard is a big concern. And when certain early warning measures and even flood management measures were being implemented on ground, like Katia showed about the bypass. The bypass in the Maylam Creek was constructed below a settlement area. And this was not an easy task for the city authorities. There were public, whether the housing structure will exist or not. So there were various stages the city authorities has to liaise with the local communities in order to ensure that trust is built before such a technology can be intervened. So in essence, things are not as easy as we think so. There are a lot of communication, as Nathalie pointed out. It's very important to talk with various water utility companies and also bring the social solidarity from the people through trust building measures. And the city authorities have been doing several awareness campaigns before having or implementing a technology on ground. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll still be on finances. In addition to the devastating impacts on finances of many water, wastewater utilities, and particularly those of us in the South that were already hemorrhaging owing to the impacts of adverse weather events and tariffs that barely covered operational expenses, we now have another disaster that has hit the entire globe, that is the COVID-19 pandemic. How have your utilities coped or even continued to provide services to the public? I'll put that to Kevin first, but we still have a few minutes, but I would get responses from Heather, etc., and John.
Yeah, thank you, Ignatius. And yeah, there is a global comment and question. COVID, obviously a disaster beyond the scales of what else we've been talking about, but also different scales in how we handle it, right? It wasn't something that you see coming for a week and prepare for a hurricane and then it goes by. Instead, this thing just hangs around. One of the biggest things we did was start practices, particularly within our operations, to make sure that we could continue to supply water and wastewater services. Because in Florida, we have to have licensed operators. And one of our biggest fears when this started was that our operators would start getting sick and we wouldn't have people able to operate the plants. So we started scheduling, different schedules, staggered schedules, those types of things. And we also used that flow-on network to look out across the state and coordinate with each other on different types of practices. And if people started to get to a point where they thought they were going to be low on operators, we would have that opportunity to send people to help them. Again, that utilities helping utilities. And the other thing I'll just mention, I'll let other people remark, is right now, what are we, 18 months into it? The supply chain issue is starting to come to a key area, at least in the United States, and I'm sure the others can speak for their different countries. We had a Orlando utility that had to cut back on water distribution because of a lack of oxygen that was being used for a very good purpose in hospitals. So, and that's where we again reach back amongst each other to help with either get more water to that system or more supply.
Okay, we just have 2 more minutes, so I'll just take one more response, say from Heather. If
Certainly.
you want to add anything to this.
Certainly, I'll add to what Kevin said. We actually had activation of our emergency operations center when our general manager declared a state of emergency for our district in March of 2020. So as we said, for 583 days in, we've had an active emergency operations center. In addition, and on top of that, we've also had additional emergencies, fires, earthquakes, pipe breaks. So we've had duplication of our emergency operations efforts, and we set those up in a little different microcosms, kind of one main EOC focusing on the pandemic and all the issues to ensure reliable water supply. As was mentioned, we really were looking at essential staff out of our about 1,900 employees. We're all essential, but we had about a third of those that still needed to remain to report to work locations decentralized over Southern California to keep water flowing. We have certain amount of automation, but there's a lot of manual operations still within our facility, given that the infrastructure itself, in some cases, is over 100 years old. The supply chain issue that was mentioned from the personal protective equipment standpoint, that was a big issue in the beginning, making sure that we had available supply. Could we get what we needed in order to keep our staff safe and working, from disinfectant cleaning supplies to masks and respirators, really making sure gloves, everything that we had to make sure that was fine. And as we are dealing with now this supply chain issue with respect to water treatment chemicals, we receive many of our chemicals obviously load by tractor and truck driver. We do receive some by rail car. And that supply chain, given natural disasters that have happened in that supply chain across the US from those manufacturing centers in the Gulf of Mexico, with major chemical plants, the extreme weather that was occurring in Texas, the extreme freeze, a lot of these halted, and we still haven't fully recovered from the supply chain halts that those natural disasters brought us. Metropolitan's response, in that we have flexibility within our treatment processes. We do use ozone disinfection in our process as primary disinfectant, but we have a reliable backup with free chlorine. So we have the ability to shift where needed, but it also is a seasonal impact based on the source supplies that we are working with, which then drought adds to the algal blooms and different things that impact your source supply from wildfire runoff, etc. So it's been, we've had staff that have been in micro teams to ensure readiness and not take out a whole team at once. That's been implemented. We've decentralized and repurposed office spaces, meeting rooms, boardroom, so forth. We still have remote working. We have a full plan to ensure workplace safety, to ensure that reliability for our customers.
Thank you. it appears that we are 11:30 plus, so we need to be wrapping up. I don't know if we are allowed to go on, Lars, as there's one question in the chat.
That's fine, Ignatius. Take the question and then we can.
Okay. All right. Thank you. The question is, how do panelist organizations plan for disaster events? Do you develop disaster response plans and conduct employee trainings? I think that was alluded to by Kevin, but we can take it again. And that was a question from the National Water Resources Association. So I probably can ask John. I know it's late in the night for him, but he seemed to still have some energy. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, thank you, Ignatius. Yeah, certainly. We actually, during a disaster, for example, in this pandemic, we were not able to have a written plan at the beginning, but then the first thing we did was to sit down and write out a plan at the very beginning, and then educate all our employees, educate them on the protocols that we're implementing, so that when things adverse would happen, they would know what to do, they would know who to report to, who to contact first, and tell about their situation, and all our employees would know as well what they will need to do. Our nurses, for example, would know what they will do in the case of a COVID positive patient in such an area and it's spreading. So yeah, all of those things. We write down a plan and educate our employees.
Okay. Thank you. Well, colleagues, we have gone well past our time, but I would like to thank you all very much for a very engaging discussion. This discussion shows that managing and responding to disasters in a changing climate is a hot topic and will continue to be so. And as we know that the global leaders are heading to Scotland later this month to treat with a lot of the climate matters. On behalf of but we in the water sector are doing our best and doing our part in educating the public and partnering with other utilities across the globe and making it a smaller place where we can learn from each other. And as Kevin stated, that conversations lead to solutions. And I think it was John who said a good plan is the best route to recovery. So I'd like to thank you all, and I would like to thank our audience for remaining with us. And I also hope that the issues we discussed have resonated with our audience. Again, I would like to congratulate the UN Habitat and GWOPA for putting on this event. And we look forward to continued collaboration across the globe in resolving matters related to the water sector globally. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day or rest of the night, as it were. Bye.
What? Already over?
No, we have plenty more options to continue the discussions and peer exchange beyond the Congress.
Tell me more. What are the options?
Well, GWOPA membership, for example. By becoming a member of GWOPA, everyone can connect to a global alliance of practitioners and experts. There are two ways of becoming a member. First, institutional members. Institutions can participate in GWOPA's assemblies and are eligible to run and vote in its International Steering Committee elections. Or second, individual members. Individuals can connect and engage with peers in the online GWOPA community. We have created a space that allows for networking and easy communication. Meet future WOP partners, stay up to date on project opportunities, and participate in peer-to-peer learning opportunities.
Sounds great. How can I join?
Simply go to www.gwopa.org and register for free. If you want to know more, you can follow GWOPA on social media and subscribe to the newsletter. Thanks for joining the 4th Global TOPS Congress. We'll see you soon.